Welcome to tonight's special meeting of the Broomfield City Council. The public can attend tonight's meeting in person at the George DeSiero City and County Building located at 1 Tacoma Drive, or watch live on Channel 8 and through live streaming on Broomfield's website, broomfield.org/live. The public may also participate in public comment, either in person or by calling 855-695-3744 and pressing *3 to be placed in the queue for comment. Screeners will ask callers for their first and last name, neighborhood, and the agenda item the caller would like to comment on. For our hearing impaired residents present, we have wireless headsets available through our AV team in the back of the council chambers. We'll now proceed with tonight's special meeting. The special meeting of the City Council is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Anderson.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
Delgadillo.
Here.
Hinkle.
Here.
Jizlerski. Leslie.
He's excused.
Lim. Here. Marshallson.
Here.
Schaff.
Here.
Ward.
Here.
Thank you. A quorum is present. Will everyone please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll begin with council's review and approval of this evening's agenda. Does any member of council have any comments or questions regarding this evening's agenda? Are there any objections to this agenda being approved? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Before we jump into tonight's special meeting agenda, I wanted to remind council and residents that there will be a study session following this special meeting. The only item for this special meeting is an update on the Broomfield Oil and Gas Air Quality Monitoring Program and staff's recommendations for the 2024 network. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you and good. Just starting right off there. Good evening, Mayor and Council and Community. Jason Volling, Director of Public Health, and Danae Brouillard, Director of Strategic Initiatives, is going to introduce this item, walk through it. They have their team here for any specific questions, and I'll also be participating when we get to the staff recommendation piece. Ms. Brouillard, please kick us off.
Thank you, Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council members, Danae Brouillard, Director of Strategic Initiatives. And this evening, as Manager Hoffman mentioned, I'll be presenting with Jason Volling, Director of Public Health. And we also have Ryan Resch, our Environment and Energy Analyst, and Dr. Megan Weisner, Senior Environmental Epidemiologist, here this evening as well to help answer questions. Next slide, please. We recognize that this topic is incredibly complex and it's challenging to cover everything. To help set the stage for the conversation, there are four objectives of the presentation that we will walk council and the community through this evening. The first part of the presentation will be a quick recap of the Oil and Gas Air Quality Monitoring Program. Staff will then summarize how the program objectives have been achieved, some to the full extent possible, and some that will continue into the future. We will then briefly highlight the changing landscape of oil and gas in Broomfield, and then conclude with the 2024 program recommendations. Next slide. The Oil and Gas Air Quality Monitoring Program was originally created after considerable work by the Oil and Gas Comprehensive Plan Update Committee, which was completed in 2017. Following the committee's work, Council adopted the Oil and Gas chapter of Broomfield's Comprehensive Plan. The chapter included action steps to conduct air quality monitoring related to oil and gas development, with the main priority being to protect public health, safety, welfare, and the environment of Broomfield residents. Four objectives were established, creating the foundation and scope for the air quality monitoring program. The four objectives are: 1, inform the public about the magnitude, frequency, and duration of air quality events that may be attributable to oil and gas sources. 2, inform Broomfield's environmental epidemiologist as health concerns are analyzed and air quality events are benchmarked against health guideline values, or HGVs. 3, inform future policy efforts at the local and state levels. And 4, contribute to the body of data and research being developed on the impacts of oil and gas development. To find a vendor that can meet the defined program objectives and provide a public webpage to display the oil and gas air quality monitoring data, Broomfield issued a request for proposals, or an RFP. Next slide. Ajax Analytics, or Ajax, is how I'll refer to it the rest of the presentation, in partnership with Colorado State University, was selected. The Ajax monitoring services are complemented by Dr. Jeff Collette, a well-known atmospheric scientist, and the canisters managed by Ajax are speciated in the CSU labs. The contract was approved on August 28th, 2018, and has remained for the past 5 years. It is important to note that although the contract has been in place for many years, the network has been strategically scaled up and down depending on current and anticipated oil and gas operations, and has included between 5 and 19 real-time air monitoring stations. The Ajax monitoring program consists of remote real-time systems, which measure total volatile organic compounds, or TVOCs, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and meteorological conditions. The real-time sensors are equipped with trigger mechanisms which are initiated once a specified measurement are recorded, allowing for remote collection of whole air canister samples. The program also includes whole air canister samples with week-long sample durations. All whole air canister samples are analyzed for 49 oil and gas related VOCs at the CSU lab. Through Q2 of 2023, the Ajax CSU program has analyzed 183 triggered whole air canister samples, and 96 of those were tied to oil and gas operations. Next slide. Here's a map of the current Ajax network, and to help folks orient themselves, this is the northern part of Broomfield. So if you look left to right or west to east, however you're looking at the map, that's the Northwest Parkway running through. So you can see the location of the Ajax network here. The network consists of the 5 real-time monitoring locations strategically located based on program data to maximize the potential to detect oil and gas related emission events. And those are the green dots on the map. Additionally, weekly whole air canister samples are collected at 5 locations to provide insight into long-term impacts to air quality, both near oil and gas operations, as well as at a background location, which is Broomfield Commons Park. And those are noted on the map with blue dots. We don't have the commons noted because it makes the map really hard to see if you include it, since it's about 3 miles away from the network that we're displaying tonight. It is notable to mention that the weekly canister with the highest benzene value during production this year, so in 2023, was collected from the background site at the Broomfield County Commons Park, which, as I mentioned, is about 3 miles south of the nearest active oil and gas pad. This is a good illustration that demonstrates levels near pad sites have or are returning to measurements consistent with background or baseline measurements not situated near pad sites. Next slide. At the December 10th, 2019 council meeting, staff prepared a resolution for council's consideration to approve the 2020 contract with Ajax and CSU. The resolution was not improved, and instead council directed staff to prepare a memo for council's consideration with contracts for both Ajax and Boulder Air. On December 17th, 2019, staff brought forward a contract with Boulder Air to complement the ongoing monitoring activity. The contract was approved and includes 2 trailer-based reference grade air monitoring systems that provide redundancies in the network specific to methane, VOCs, nitrogen oxide, particulate matter, and meteorological conditions. Boulder Air also monitors for the secondary pollutant ozone. Next slide. Here's a map of the current Boulder Air network, which consists of the 2 air monitoring trailers that I just mentioned near residential areas. These locations were selected with the intent to complement the existing network and to improve spatial coverage near residents. Next slide. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there were 4 objectives established for the oil and gas air quality monitoring program. We're 5 years into the program, and we wanted to provide an update on how the objectives have been achieved over the course of this time. For objective 1, which was to inform the public about the magnitude, frequency, and duration of air quality events that may be attributable to oil and gas sources, staff shares information with the community regarding oil and gas operations, as well as air events related to oil and gas activity via the monthly snapshot and a one-off as needed, the oil and gas dashboard, quarterly reports, the public dashboard maintained by the air monitoring vendors as well. It's important to note that the program, and specifically this objective, work in conjunction with our inspection program, which may be the only program of its kind in the entire state. The information we're able to share with the community related to oil and gas emissions is taken a step further, as we have inspectors who inspect the pad sites daily and are deployed for air events during inspection hours, which is almost every single day from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. We wanted to highlight some of this great work that's been done related to this objective that not only ensures operator compliance, but puts the health and safety of residents at the forefront. In June 2020, staff worked in collaboration with Ajax and Boulder Air to identify a leaking segment of the Martin gathering line near Zuni and 152nd. It led to an environmental investigation and follow-up remedial actions. In May 2023, staff worked in collaboration with Ajax to identify a leaking segment of the Martin gathering line by Huron and 160th. That also resulted in mitigation actions and a complete repair of the joint. And finally, on May 23rd, 2023, staff worked with Ajax to identify an equipment failure at the Livingston pad. As a result, significant preventative maintenance was completed by the operator, and a notice of alleged violation was issued by the ECMC, the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission, or the former COGCC. Next slide. I will now pass it to Jason. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. Jason Balling, Director of Public Health. And yeah, we're definitely tag teaming this presentation. So Danae and I may be going back and forth a little bit on the slides, but please be patient with us as we do that. As far as objective 2, the idea behind this was to inform Broomfield's environmental epidemiologists regarding the health concerns and have those analyzed against air quality events and look at them against the health guideline values. And you'll recall when we started working on this, we were hearing from residents concerns, but we didn't really have a methodology of tracking that. And the big thing we wanted to do is look at specifically what were the air events, what was the health concerns that were reported, and then look at what was happening on the pad and trying to correlate those 3. As we continued to build the program, we hired an amazing senior environmental epidemiologist, Dr. Weisner. She brings both that epidemiology, but also some of the toxicology expertise that was needed to really inform us as we're providing comments back to council on what we were achieving. You know that we came back continually to council to quarterly provide updates on what we're seeing regarding health concerns and also sharing those with the public. The other thing, though, that we did see as we were going through the program was a decrease in those health concerns that were being reported for various reasons. And so with that, we've since Q2 of 2022, we haven't been able to do a detailed analysis of those concerns coming in. I believe for 2023, we only have 7 health concerns that have been reported. So that has made it a little bit more challenging, right, to do that original objective of looking at air events, health concerns, and comparing to what was happening on the pad. But with that, we still are doing quite a bit. And the thing that we have also worked very closely with is CDPHE. We have monthly meetings with them, specifically with the toxicology and environmental epidemiology program there. And we share our data, what we're seeing, what's been reported. We also share what's happening on the pad, so they're aware of what's going on if we find something in those air events. But they also share information back with us. So if there's information reported to them, we get that. So it's been a really collaborative relationship. And we do have to rely heavily on the CDPHE toxicology department because they have way more expertise and toxicologists than we have here in Broomfield. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So this is where I think we've been the most active, and it's probably some of, when you look at why are we collecting data, I think this came up last year when we were presenting, what are we doing with it and what's the impact? And so when we set up this program, we were very clear. We wanted to not only collect data, but we wanted to use that to inform and hopefully change state and local regulations. And I would say our data was extremely useful in doing that. As you're very aware, our health data was instrumental in us passing a 2,000-foot setback ordinance, I believe one of the first in the state. the reverse setbacks. And additionally, we saw a lot of issues around noise, which was surprising to us in those health concerns, and came back to council, had that conversation, which led council to pass a noise ordinance. So I do want to acknowledge that the information that was gathered and collected was very helpful in changing local policy. At the same time, we've been very active in state level policy, and as Dr. Wisner's involvement in health concerns has decreased, she's become our Broomfield expert on air quality and health. And so she's primarily the one that is providing testimony at these state bodies, the ECMC, in addition to the CDPH Air Quality Commission. And due to her efforts, we were able to influence CDPHE to strengthen Regulation 3, which is really looking at the rulemaking around monitoring impacts in disproportionately impacted communities. Based on Dr. Wisner's recommendations and some of the issues with hazardous air pollutions and health guideline values, they went back and suggested they use some of our methodology and recommendations as they move forward. So that's one example of how policy has changed at the state level as far as regulations. And that's specifically to oil and gas regulations. Second thing is regulation number 7 is the greenhouse gas intensity verification. Dr. Wisner also presented with our local government coalition to support enhanced methane monitoring for oil and gas sites. Based on the recommendations from the Air Pollution and Control Division to the Air Quality Control Commission and the testimony that was provided from local governments, they did go ahead and pass that regulation, which we think was extremely important. And again, specific to oil and gas. We've also been very involved, and Dr. Wisner has presented numerous times. It used to be the COGCC, now it's the ECMC. On cumulative impacts. She just recently presented. The presentation was well received. And so we hope that there's going to be incorporation of some of our recommendations into that process. And then lastly, to the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, we submitted written comments along with Boulder and Adams County on the pipeline safety program. And we were able to look at our air quality monitoring, which found 2 midstream leaks. So those findings helped support the need for the PUC to implement new rulemaking around advanced leak detection technology. So as you can see, Dr. Wisner and our team of our legal team and our strategic initiatives teams have been very involved in state policy and rulemaking. And this is where we really see the changes that can impact Broomfield. Can we go to the next slide? So the program objective 4 was looking at how can we contribute to the body of data and research being developed on the impacts of oil and gas development. So for those of you that have been involved in this for a long period of time, you'll remember we were looking at peer-reviewed literature coming in, but some of the questions we always got was, well, Broomfield's different based on the drilling technologies, our topography, et cetera. So it was almost like dismissing the national literature, some of the stuff coming out of Pennsylvania and others. Really led us to say we need to demonstrate what's the impact here in Broomfield and contribute to that body of evidence. And hence that's why we moved forward with our specific studies. The big one was the oil and gas health study publication. Again, that was the one where we looked at, sent out a random sample and we looked at emissions and the impact on residents' health living within close proximity to oil and gas. In my opinion, that was a very important study. It's been peer reviewed and published. The biggest question we always got back from the formerly COGCC was, if it's not peer reviewed, we'll think about it, but not really consider it. The fact that it got published has really strengthened that. So when we talk about data for data collection, it's not for us to do research, it's really to get solidified data to make a strong case with these regulatory bodies. Additionally, we've been involved in numerous academic conferences and presentations. And we're pleased to also announce the Ajax and our CESU research team, specifically Dr. Collette, has submitted data gathered from Broomfield for publication. So again, adding to that body of research that then can be used as we're going forward and advocating for rulemaking. And specifically looking at source apportionment and the VOC spatial variation. And those have been submitted, and we hope that will be published soon. We've also submitted another, Dr. Collette has also submitted another manuscript for publication. We're waiting to hear more on that. And then provided testimony to the ECMCs. And then Dr. Helmig helped providing data from his monitoring station to the EPA and their data database, and hopefully strengthening some of that that's going on. So we do believe that we've done a lot in this area, still potentially more to be done, but excited about where it's going. And next slide. It gets back to you.
Director Valling. We'll now transition into the third part of the presentation and spend some time discussing the evolving landscape of oil and gas development in Broomfield, as well as the data that has been collected through the Broomfield Oil and Gas Air Quality Monitoring Network. As of January 2023, all oil and gas pads in Broomfield are in production. We know that oil and gas related emissions are still going to happen, but they have decreased significantly. So the graph on the screen illustrates the percentage of triggers that occur by phase, and this is normalized data. So what does that mean? As of Q2 2023, a total of 183 triggered whole air canister samples were analyzed by Colorado State University. Staff normalized the number of triggers based on the number of days per phase for each well. Data shows that the majority of canisters occurred during drilling, 86.5% happened during drilling, followed by coiled tubing in production, tubing installation, flowback, hydraulic fracturing, and production. As we noted, emission events may still occur. However, less than 1% of all the valid trigger canisters from the program through Q2 of 2023 occurred during the production phase when the data is normalized as outlined. Next slide, please. As we look at the Broomfield air quality monitoring data across the network, our data shows that in the first quarter of this year, we began to see post-production patterns similar to those seen in Livingston in 2020. The data from the second quarter of this year shows continuation of VOC patterns beginning to return to concentrations expected for the Colorado Front Range. We expect that weekly VOC concentrations will be consistent with the data from Livingston in the months following production, and a continued return to an ambient general background within several months. The chart here displayed focuses on benzene, which is one of the volatile organic compounds monitored and arguably the most important due to its carcinogenic nature and low health guideline value. It is also the most widely studied VOC. The chart shows weekly benzene values since the start of the program in 2018. All wells were officially in production by January 13, 2023, as indicated by the red arrow on the graph. It is very difficult, I will say, to look at the chart and look at 5 years of data. But what we do know from looking at it and breaking it down more on daily and year over year is that the weekly benzene ranges are much less than what we observed during pre-production phases. As noted earlier in the presentation, the highest value during production this year for benzene, which was 0.46 ppb in July of 2023, was at the common site, which is over 3 miles away from the pads and is used for background level comparison. Over the course of the program, staff has learned that pre-production plumes can vary in terms of frequency, magnitude, and duration. The Ajax CSU monitors have captured plumes at the pad sites, which can be attributed to specific pad activities. For example, removal of the pipe from the wellbore and emptying of sand cans. Additionally, oil and gas related plumes have been tracked by the monitoring network and provide evidence that plumes travel distances greater than the 2,000-foot state setback. Although plumes disperse as they travel, Broomfield's oil and gas air quality monitoring system have proven that exposure to multiple VOCs may occur at distances beyond the state setback, especially during pre-production pad activities when plumes occur at greater frequencies and magnitudes than during production. Next slide. To adapt to the changing landscape and based on the data summarized a moment ago, the oil and gas air quality monitoring program objectives will shift in 2024. This will provide better alignment of resources to keep operators in compliance and monitoring pad activities while keeping the health and safety of residents at the forefront. The following two original objectives of the program have been accomplished to the extent intended as covered by Director Veiling just a moment ago. The first was the objective to inform Broomfield's environmental epidemiologist as health concerns are analyzed. And two, the objective to contribute to the body of data and research being developed on the impacts of oil and gas development and how the characterization of air emissions can inform best management practices as well. With the two objectives above being completed, beginning in 2024, the program will now have two key objectives, which are carried over from the original four, and they are to inform the public about the magnitude, frequency, and duration of air quality events that may be attributable to oil and gas sources, and two, inform future policy efforts at the local and state levels by providing written comments, testimony, and presentations relevant to air quality and oil and gas.
So next slide. So want to go a little bit into the funding landscape, specifically state, federal funding and grants. So at this point in time, we have heard agreement from state agencies and elected officials that there's a large financial burden to local taxpayers with having these local air monitoring programs. But they have all said they have no funding available for us, nor as far as we know, additional plans to offset any of the costs in the near future. So this is something I'll go into more detail later, but that we've been heavily pushing as a overall city and county to, because we've heard loudly from council that the belief is the state should be paying for this, not us. At the same time, we have taken advantage of opportunities to apply for funding, specifically looking at air monitoring. So we submitted a proposal for ozone and climate research. This was with the city of Longmont and the local government coalition. And the idea was the grant would go to the Department of Local Affairs for grant funds related to air monitoring and climate action resiliency planning. The Front Range Local Government Air Monitoring Coalition has signed on as co-applicants, and Broomfield has joined as a community partner. If Longmont is awarded the grant, Broomfield Boulder air data will not be used as part of the research, and this was just part of the application process we went through in negotiations with the city of Longmont. This new round of grant funds that will be announced in mid-November are not intended to offset any community air quality monitoring costs, including ours, but rather the grant is to be for an expert to interpret the data that's already in existence. So just to be clear, we're applying for funding to continue to look at air monitoring specifically in those areas, but this is not to support what we're currently doing. And then DOLA met with the city of Longmont on September 1st to discuss the grant proposal and invited them to present the proposal to a funding commission in Avon on October 23rd. We expect that winners will be announced sometime in mid-November. Next slide. So this is specifically what we've been doing as an agency. So one thing I heard loud and clear when we presented the last time to council was we need to get the state to start to contribute. So I set up a meeting with the CDPHE leadership, Jill Hunsaker-Ryan, the executive director, Trish Olathe, who oversees their environmental programs. She's the director of environmental programs. Michael Ogletree, who oversees their pollution control division, and then other staff that they had available. And we discussed at length what we're collecting and how it could potentially be useful to what they're doing. They were pretty clear at that point in time that they did not have funding for Broomfield to cover our local air monitoring stations. And some of this has to go to the fact that within their statewide network, which they have available for looking at all of the criteria, air pollutants, and also the state implementation plan, they set up that network statewide, and it has to follow a specific methodology, has to be approved, go through the EPA as part of the planning process. So for them to just take our air monitoring data is something that's not actionable at this point in time. The other thing is we met with the MC staff, and this was Dr. Weisner and myself, specifically looking at some of the settlement funds. What was the name of that? The Martinez-Irwin settlement funds as a potential funding source, mentioning the local air monitoring data we're getting, and also looking at the potential health study that we were proposing. They made it very clear that this doesn't align with their priorities at this point, and so no funding would be available for us. Additionally, in 2023, local governments in Broomfield applied for the air quality enterprise funds. So we kept saying we expect CDPHE to release some funds for air monitoring. And so we did apply for these funds on behalf of Boulder Air to analyze the data for purposes of advancing ozone research. The application was not selected for funding. And again, it's important to note that the only state-run monitoring data is used when calculating things like design values, modeling, etc. So the state does not use local air monitoring data, even those that are reference grade collection sites, because it's not part of their network. I believe that's that slide.
We're into the final portion of the presentation this evening, which is the recommendation for the 2024 Oil and Gas Air Quality Monitoring Network. Council previously approved the 2 contracts for 2023 and authorized the city and county manager to renew each on an annual basis for up to 3 additional 1-year terms. The reason we are bringing it back before council today was at the December 13th, 2022 meeting. The discussion from council was not clear whether or not renewal in future years was desired by the body. And we learned from the 2023 year that the budget calendar doesn't always align with the calendar of the network. And so if you all recall, in 2023, we didn't budget. We budgeted based off of staff recommendations, and then we ended up over budget and had to find money. So this time we just kept the money as is for 2024 and made a note that we would come back to council with data in Q4 to get clear direction on how we proceed with that funding. Based on the data obtained in the changing landscape of the oil and gas operations in Broomfield, staff is making the following recommendations for the 2024 network. They're consistent with past recommendations and correlation of monitoring to pad operations. For 2024, the staff recommendation is to keep the 2023 terms and conditions for Ajax and renew the current contract as outlined earlier this evening. For this recommendation, program data indicates plumes occur less frequently and with decreased magnitude during production when compared to pre-production. Real-time sensor systems strategically placed on historic emission events near the producing pads will maximize potential to detect future emission events. In order to provide additional monitoring to the residential areas northwest of oil and gas operations along the Northwest Parkway, the Northwest 2 station may be relocated from the middle of the Northwest pads to the west side of the Northwest pads. And I'll show you this on a map. It's a small change, but to make sure that we have a monitor towards the residents. There would be 5 Ajax monitoring stations placed near the 6 oil and gas pads in Broomfield, which provides adequate spatial coverage to accomplish the objectives of the program previously outlined. Additionally, weekly whole air canister samples will continue to provide insight into the long-term impacts to air quality associated with oil and gas operations. For Boulder Air, the staff recommendation is to discontinue the Boulder Air contract for 2024. And for this recommendation, the program data indicates emissions from oil and gas operations are capable of traveling a distance greater than the current 2,000-foot setback into residential areas. However, Plumes are far more diluted at this distance and less likely to be captured during production, as data shows that frequency and magnitude of oil and gas related plumes have decreased. With the reduction in plumes that originate from oil and gas sites during production, a gas chromatography mass spectrometry instrument, which is Boulder Air, which only captures and analyzes a sample for VOCs 10 minutes out of every hour. So that's about 17% of a 24-hour period. It's not an efficient way to capture plumes when they're less frequent and less in magnitude. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, Boulder Air Monitoring currently provides redundancies in the system outside of ozone, which is a secondary pollutant. While Boulder Air collects data that may be useful for broader community air quality monitoring, this data is not necessary to meet the current Broomfield AQM monitoring objectives related to oil and gas specifically. The recommendation is consistent with the 2023 network recommendation to scale back the network based on pad operations and data from the air quality monitoring network over time, while continuing to put health and safety of residents and the environment at the forefront. Although all pads are in production, air events are going to still occur. I think we need to dispel that in this presentation. And we believe that this recommendation allows staff to continue to monitor the air in close proximity to the pads in conjunction with the Broomfield inspection program, which I highlighted earlier, for an additional year, as we collect more data and more specifically emissions of toxic air pollutants related to oil and gas. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Bouillard and Director Volling. We'll now proceed with public comments, starting with in person. If there's anyone who would like to be heard, please come to the podium and state your name and neighborhood for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Roxy Jewell out of Luckmore. We have to remember this is about oil and gas. So the rest of the community doesn't matter on any pollutants that they have around them. So this money is only going to go towards oil and gas. So you're not going to hear me say this very often. So I am backing what the staff is asking to pay for, not for the added. I can't write off anything happening at CU and their papers and stuff. But when you force the taxpayers to have to pay for it, that just seems wrong. But we don't need them anymore. It's already been stated. So please go with the staff this time. Quit overriding everything that they ask and just get it over with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam Gobetti, Ward 5, McKay Landing. So one of my favorite quotes is, everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler than that. Again, we have a complex situation. Take some time. So a lot of what's been discussed, and there have been some great examples given, is very focused on the oil and gas monitoring specifically. That's important. That's good. But excuse me, we need to be concerned about our air quality overall. And there is a lot going on that the existing monitoring is catching. There are things happening with ozone. There are things happening with the impact of wildfires. And then it's not just that the things that are still being caught as far as equipment failures or other things with the oil and gas, there's things that are being found with just normal utilities having natural gas leaks. So I am completely open to the possibility that what we're doing needs to be rethought significantly, but it needs to be rethought, carefully evaluated, and transitioned to. So I've got deep experience in technical areas, and I will tell you that once you break the chain of data, you've broken it. You don't get restore it back. You don't get the same kind of calibration and track record when you then add something back later. So I would ask that we do not discontinue any of the current efforts now until there is a clear plan for what we are going to move to that is going to be accounting for what we should be measuring for our environmental air quality overall. The oil and gas may have been what kicked it off, but that's misleading. We need to be looking at our environment overall, and we should be very cautious about losing some very important data. GCMS is quantitative, and it picks up a lot of different things that you can see in a lot of different ways. So I would ask the city council to not be narrow-minded, not be narrow vision. Think about what we need overall, think about what we should be transitioning to overall, and then come up with a plan to transition. Do not break the chain of data for the monitoring that we currently have until we know what we are moving to. And absolutely, we should be putting pressure and we should put more effort into getting state and other agencies to fund this. It's unfortunate that we're having to pay for it. We probably shouldn't be, but ultimately we got to protect our environment. We got to protect our health. And this is very important data. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in person who would like to be heard? Well, then we'll go to the phones. We have 2 callers and we'll start with Rick. You're on and you have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Rick Casey. I am a resident of Fort Collins. I have been a resident of Colorado since 1981. I've lived in Fort Collins since 2018. My other qualifications to speak tonight is that I've been involved in environmental activism since 2012 in the Front Range, and I'm the webmaster for 4 different websites: the Larimer Alliance, the Northern Colorado Alliance for a Livable Future, Colorado Coalition for a Livable Climate, and the Fort Collins Sustainability Group. I work in IT, but I have taught a course in environmental economics at Front Range since 2009. I'm deeply aware of what's been going on in the Front Range ever since our ozone problem really got identified. And why I have an interest in your meeting tonight is that we up here in Fort Collins have been trying to get a Boulder Air Monitor up here, and we're still going to continue to do that. And I would strongly disagree with your decision to discontinue support for Boulder Air's monitors. Boulder Air deserves continued support because the quality of its data can be joined with the 5 other sites where it's used in the Front Range to form a powerful database of how to manage our ozone pollution problem more long-term. Boulder Air's data is of reference grade, meaning it is legally defensible in court cases, and it is annually submitted to EPA's national program that collects air quality data across the country. Because Boulder Air's monitors can precisely identify the ozone precursors that differentiate between oil and gas and vehicles, the 2 main sources of our ozone causes here. No other technology does this, including Ajax Analytics. Now, Ajax Analytics data is very questionable because it's never been audited. It's not real time because there's a big delay between the canister is triggered and when it's analyzed in a lab. Their data has never been compared to Boulder Air's data. They're measuring 2 slightly different things, but you got to be careful about telling the public what Boulder Air's data is protecting its public from versus what Ajax Analytics data is doing. And Ajax Analytics seems focused on specific oil and gas sites. It's not region-wide and therefore has negligible value for protecting the entire community. I also heard anecdotally that Ajax monitors continually give false positives, and that's another big reason why you need to get this audited. So please clarify for the public what Ajax Analytics is doing to protect the public versus Boulder Air data. And I strongly encourage you to continue to support Boulder Air. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Kathy. You're on and you have 3 minutes.
Why is staff proposing eliminating the Boulder Air program when it is the monitoring program that does protect our health and safety along with the environment? Just as a reminder, most of council did run on health and safety and the environment. And if you need to cut back on tax dollars spent, Ajax should be the one that is eliminated. Some of the reasons why include Dr. Detlev has the education, the work experience, and background that is required to protect health and safety of residents. Sorry, Ajax does not have that. Brett Buck, who is the owner of Ajax, does not even have a BS in chemistry or a BA. Dr. Detlev was able to pinpoint a very old gas leak and I think he referred to this as the pipeline safety program. And he pinpointed that using his equipment that's reference grade at the Pecos location. The very old gas leak, and this was something like 40 or 50 years old, was coming for some pipes at 156 in Zuni. And because the gas is explosive, there was a potential for an explosion there. Also, that leak was occurring 24/7, and that was affecting our climate. Dr. Detlev was also able to triangulate emission sources to the northwest path. When emission sources can be located, they may be able to be repaired, which protects the health and safety in our environment. Ajax does not seem to be able to do this type of complicated analysis unless maybe Dr. Detlev trained them. The Boulder Air program uses a reference grade air monitoring equipment, whereas Ajax systems and sensors have been plagued with technical issues since day one. These technical issues raise questions about whether or not the Ajax system is valid. City and County of Broomfield has stated the Ajax program is an experimental program, an R&D project. Please stop experimenting with our health and safety. We need reference grade monitoring equipment, not R&D equipment that is plagued with problems over the years. Since day one, Ajax sensors have been plagued with constant technical issues. All of the initial sensors that were purchased and deployed to the field were gutted and replaced with the current system sensors. The lack of a chemistry background and education results in Ajax trying to take the sensors way past their lifetime, way past the manufacturer's recommendations. Some examples of some of the problems that can happen, and you've got all the data, and you've got Lori Anderson there to talk to get a lot more data. I didn't want to write all these up in an email and get too long. Was after the Marshall fire, the sensors were damaged.
Kathy, can
and
you
Ajax
please
just
wrap
kept
up?
trying to use them. Okay.
Can you wrap it up, please?
So, yeah. So the manufacturers states their sensors are engineered to avoid the effects of humidity. We started hearing a lot of that. Oh, the sensor isn't working right because it's humid. Well, they don't prove that. And any valid air quality monitoring system needs to not have unproven claims out there, but to actually prove the sensors are affected by humidity. And the
Kathy,
manufacturer
your
says they are
time
not.
has
Thank you.
expired. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on this topic before we move on to council questions? Seeing none. Council questions, comments? Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a few questions. One is, do we have any information on the minimum harmful dose of benzene and how long someone needs to be exposed? The thing that prompted that question, to give you a little bit more context and hopefully help me answer this, is essentially that even though the trend is decreasing, we kind of in tech and in other places, we have the concept of a P99, the 99th percentile, right? And so if that's enough to cause some sort of health event, that's actually what we care about, regardless of whether the overall trend is changing in that direction. So can we answer that question?
Thank you for that question. Megan Weisner, Senior Environmental Epidemiologist. To answer your question, yes, we have extensive information on the harmful effects of chemicals like benzene. Benzene is the most widely studied chemical out there, I would say. And there are health guideline values set. So there's acute values set for exposures and duration, intermittent short-term exposures up to 2 weeks. And then there are health guideline values set for exposures for 1 year up to a lifetime. The highest weekly value of benzene so far this year was 0.46 parts per billion, whereas the chronic measurement or the chronic health guideline value for benzene is 3 parts per billion. So we are still above, a little bit above background, but that is the highest measurement. But overall, since we've been in production, the weekly canisters for benzene are trending back toward those background estimates of benzene, which are usually around 0.2 parts per billion.
All right, thank you for that answer. And then so one of the things that was raised was essentially the some feedback on the quality of data surrounding the air monitoring we have and the Ajax data. Do we have any information on whether that data is consistent with each other, whether they're within reasonable variations? Are they completely monitoring totally different things? Is there any way to essentially parse that question on the quality of that data?
Sure. So one clarification point to make is CSU analyzes the canisters that Ajax collects. So the monitoring network is designed by Ajax. It's maintained by Ajax, and it's done sort of in collaboration with CSU, with one of the best atmospheric scientists out there, Dr. Jeff Collette, and his group of PhD students. So they work in the laboratory, and when a trigger canister goes off, it's collected. CSU comes down, grabs the canister and takes it back to the lab. And they speciate for 49 different VOCs, of which methane is included in that. They also look at particulate matter 2.5 microns in size and smaller. And then benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, all of the chemicals and compounds of concern.
All right.
The other thing I want to mention, because it was brought up, is the reference grade monitoring station versus what Ajax utilizes. What we're hearing is the state's moving towards the technology that Ajax has, the PID sensors. And so when we talk about the reliability and validity, you're seeing more reliance on that because you're getting real-time data collecting. So one thing that we did want to emphasize is that with the Boulder Air system, you're collecting a measurement of for over 15 minutes and then extrapolating what you're seeing for that hour. Whereas Ajax, you're getting that data real time. And then what we're doing is taking that information, grabbing if it exceeds a canister, and then going back and analyzing it. So I think that's just one thing to keep in mind. You keep hearing reference grade, but the regulatory agencies are now moving towards utilizing this technology.
Okay. I think those are my my questions. I suppose one more thing, just for all of us to know, and I think for everyone to hear here, is have we had any technical issues with Ajax? Are we worried about their ability to continually monitor the air quality, or has everything been kind of hunky-dory?
Thank you, Councilmember Delgadillo, for the question. So in the contract and the scope of work with Ajax, there's a 90% service level agreement, which is very high in the industry standards. And right now, so it's over a 12-month rolling period. So it gets a little tricky, right? Depending on how many dates are in the month and all of that. But we went back and looked from when we started in January to, I think, October 9th of this month, October 10th, 4th. And we were at 96%. So we haven't had concerns of them not meeting the SLA agreement of 90%. And we typically see uptime higher than that 90% threshold.
All right. Thank you all for those questions. I am good, Mayor. Thank you.
Mayor, if I may just quickly, so we don't want this to be a value judgment on either Ajax or Boulder Air. They're two very different components to an overall health related issue that Colorado continues to see. So they're not in competition with each other from our perspective, from a health perspective, from an oil and gas perspective. They deliver two very different avenues of information. The speed with which they deliver it isn't a value judgment from our perspective. So I don't want it to go down the path that Boulder Air is either any less reliable or more reliable, nor Ajax. From an ozone containment attainment perspective, really the question is from and it's hard to hear from the community that, we don't care about public health, or making a decision to go either direction. As I look at the mayor, who has been a champion of public health and environment and safety and every component that comes with that, which is why we have a team of 7 that we didn't have in 2018 that do this every day, 24/7. It's the difference between Broomfield continuing to pay for a regional community air monitoring, which we're not placing value on that. Is it helpful? Is it of value? Yes, it is.
Thank you,
Is
Ms.
it
Hoffman.
outside of the oil and gas?
I've got-
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Manager Hoffman, and thank you, Mayor. I just have a few questions for right now, and I have a feeling I'll have some follow-up questions once some other council members speak as well. I know that we have gone back and forth with CDPHE, and I know that we say, hey, you pay for it. And they say, well, actually, we need a study that goes along with this. So I'm wondering, so in the past, we've also asked them to, can you test these VOCs and figure out how benzene works with xylene in our bodies? Are they working synergistically and those sorts of things? They said, no, we can't do that. And then I was startled to hear that a very low percentage was actually tested for the way that these, compounds even work together. We know that there is no safe levels of benzene, but yet we're always, peaking above that level, but then we can't actually do much about it. That's the hard thing for me. And I've spoke about this over the past 4 years, is that we don't have, the ability to really cut somebody off if they go over, right? It's just like it has to keep going. They have to be within that certain realm, but it's not going to stop anything. So my question is this, is that when CDPHE says they don't have the funding, do they mean that they don't have the funding for the testing, or they don't have the funding for the testing and the studies? Or what does that look like when we are asking the CDPHE these questions?
So specifically, CDPHE is not interested in funding a health study. We've asked that directly, and even the study that we completed, could we build upon that? They did their study back in 2019 based on modeling what they believe the potential health impacts will be. The second thing we've heard from CDPHE though too is there was a bill passed, I'm going to forget the year. It was part of the looking at disparately impacted communities and hazardous air pollutants. And so as part of the rulemaking they're going through, they have to now, Councilmember Hinkle, look more specifically and designate what are those hazardous air pollutants. And then within Colorado, come up with some classifications. So that's in the works, but it won't be until 2025.
Okay, so it sounds like they are willing to at least use this testing. Am I right? Like, are they willing to use and pay for something like Boulder Air? Are they willing to just pay for the data?
Specifically, when we asked, will you pay for Boulder Air or use it? The response was no, because it cannot be included in their air monitoring system. Again, for the state, where the state is graded under the EPA Clean Indoor Air Act, because it's not one of those approved stations. And then secondly, when they're looking at data, they have to get to source apportionment. And so they've strategically placed meteorological along with these testing stations as part of their network to determine where those sources are coming from. And so we've asked why can't you use our data? We feel like we have data that's useful and could help inform them. And that's been the response we've got back from them.
Okay. In your opinion, do you feel like what the parameters the EPA is putting on the state are what our residents need or have been asking for?
Clarify a little bit more with your question.
So it sounds like they're moving more towards like what Ajax is doing. Maybe I could rephrase this. What is the reasoning behind that? And why would they, it sounded like it was more real time, is that correct?
So not going away from one or the other, as we were talking about, City Manager Hoffman said it really well. Both are really useful.
Right,
But what I was trying to illustrate was that they hadn't been using the PID sensors in the past, and that's something that's going to be incorporated
okay,
into their networks and what they're doing going forward. In addition to what they have with the reference grade stationary air monitoring systems.
okay, all right, thank you. And then can you speak a little bit to the grant? What does it look like for us financially? If that grant is won, or if it's not won, what does that mean for us financially?
For that question, Councilmember Henkel. So we are a community partner on that DOLA grant, and that DOLA grant would take our Boulder Air data and analyze it and try to understand where ozone sources are coming from in the Front Range region. It does not pay for any of our air monitoring ever moving forward. So it's just taking a deeper analysis at our data that's already been collected
Okay,
if we do get that grant.
gotcha. Okay, thank you. Is EPA, have they indicated that they would be paying for any of this testing in the future? If they've made these sort of mandates on, hey, you guys need to be in attainment, are they ponying up?
So just when you look at the Clean Air Act, and then specifically how it works, EPA works directly with the states. So then the states have their air monitoring systems to figure out, are we in compliance or not in compliance with the NAAQS, National Ambient Air Quality Standards. If they're not, then the state has to develop their implementation plan. What strategies are we going to put into place to address this? So there, from my understanding, there's nothing about EPA trying to go to the local level for data collection. They primarily work with states.
Okay. And have they, let's see, I had another question. I might have to follow up with that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But it does deal with the Ajax and talking with the EPA and what that future funding might look like from the state if we move towards that type of air collection. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councilmember Marshallson.
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't expect to go this soon. So a few questions. Going off what Councilmember Hinkle was just saying on the state monitoring. So my understanding is the Boulder Air is not part of the state network, correct?
That is correct.
So my question, I guess, is if we were, does the Boulder Air help determining compliance or at all? I mean, I guess my question is if we discontinued it, is there a situation where the state data would show that we were in compliance, but we're actually not because we're, our state, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, could ours have an impact on the state being compliant or not?
So from the state monitoring system, it's pretty clear we're in non-attainment based on the measurements that they have. The Boulder Air data has been useful from an advocacy perspective to say, here's where we're seeing the ozone coming from. And it primarily what I've seen in the presentations is really illustrating that it comes from Weld County and can impact our overall air quality. This is my opinion that I believe if Broomfield was not part of that network, you still have that regional group collecting that data that is a good illustration of what our ozone looks like and where it's coming from. So when we do go present with that local government group, we often find they're talking about the Boulder Air and what they're seeing with that data. And then we're going into what we're seeing as far as the health guideline values and health effects. So trying to package those together. And then the other thing I would say is, again, we're talking about going to the state and advocating that we need to be looking at when we're doing ozone rulemaking or whatever it is, how can we make it stronger? So we just recently, as the local government coalition, testified to the legislative interim committee on ozone. And we had the opportunity to go in and present what we're seeing here in Broomfield, but we also had that local government coalition go in and present what they're seeing from Boulder Air. So I say the two systems complement each other. And I don't think, in my personal opinion, Broomfield would lose a lot in that advocacy efforts by not having Boulder Air.
That was my next question. Do you think we lose important data points by discontinuing Boulder Air?
Well, one thing I want to add with ozone rulemaking that's coming up is that ozone is caused by reactions from VOCs and precursors. So just last Friday, I presented to the interim legislative ozone committee, did I get that name right, down at the Capitol with our other local governments. And we were able to talk about the VOC precursors that we often see. Boulder Air can show there are VOC precursors, and Ajax can show that there are VOC precursors. The Ajax data gets really specific with what phase of oil and gas are VOC precursors coming from, at what level, what's the chemical composition, which phase is more harmful. So it gets a lot more specific because we've had so many dozens and dozens of canisters that we were correlated to different phases of oil and gas. So we're absolutely still relevant in the rulemaking world with ozone, with the Ajax data that we've collected if we no longer have Boulder Air moving forward.
Okay, so I guess my concern is, I would argue, I think many of us would, that a lot of the movement we've seen at the state level has been because of Broomfield, because of council and staff pushing for these things. We all know that the state has for years ignored the dangers of oil and gas production, has prioritized the corporate profits of multi-million-dollar companies over the health of communities. And so I'm worried that if we discontinue this, we lose a leverage point. We've pushed the state to make changes, and I don't want to lose a leverage point to continue that progress. Do you feel like discontinuing Boulder Air would do that?
Personally, I don't feel like we would lose leverage because we've paved this way for even, we're on these calls with CDPHE, and in the beginning, years ago, they used to say, oh, you guys really love those PID systems. Well, guess who's using PID systems now? CDPHE, the APCD is. So we have dramatically shifted the landscape, and with the data that we've collected, we're still relevant moving forward. So I'm not concerned. We're still part of that local government monitoring group with Erie, Boulder, and Longmont, because some of them also use Ajax monitoring and Boulder Air monitoring. It's not like we pit these monitoring systems against each other. It's let's just get it all together, all this data together, and move forward. So it's really about like banding together and staying together and using our data together. And that's where we're at. So I don't feel like that discontinuation would prevent us from moving forward with our local governments and all of this really great data that we have.
Okay. Speaking of Longmont, it was mentioned that Longmont applied for a grant is that similar to what we're already doing? And if it is, when is that coming online? If they get the grant, when would expect it to become online?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Longmont applied for the grant on the local government's behalf. So Broomfield's a community partner for that DOLA grant. Boulder's part of it, Erie's part of it. And I think Commerce City might even be part of that one. I don't know when funds would be administered for that, but again, it won't pay for any air monitoring. It'll just pay for additional research. And Dr. Helmig would organize, more researchers to work with him to further analyze the data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And then I just had one more
Oh, okay.
question about costs.
That's fine.
On a strictly financial perspective, the oil and gas development is all up in the northern part of Broomfield, and the southern part of Broomfield has missing sidewalks and broken sidewalks and non-accessible sidewalks and unpaved streets. So just from a strictly crass financial perspective, how much are we paying every year for the Boulder?
430,000.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Danae, do you need to
Sorry,
clarify?
was that for both vendors?
No,
was the
just
question?
Boulder Air.
Okay, yeah, I think the contract for this year was for 450,000
Right.
for the two trailers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all, Mayor.
Next is Councilmember Shab.
Thank you, staff, for bringing this to council. So I'm curious, in terms of looking at this program, if we were to take a different approach, what would be, and I'm sure that staff analyzes, so I just wanted to ask, what would be the advantages and disadvantages or setbacks to just keeping the Boulder Air program and discontinuing the Ajax program for the purposes of oil and gas in Broomfield, not for the overall community ozone program?
So the question is, if we did flip-flopped, okay, and we kept Boulder Air. So the nature of oil and gas plumes are sporadic. And that's what we've learned over the last 5 years. They're sporadic, generally speaking. We have these short-term bursts and intermittent leaks and, with the exception of very seldom incidents where maybe something breaks and it's a constant stream. That's the nature of oil and gas plumes, short and sporadic. They occur at a location, and as you place a sensor further from the source, you have less availability or less chances of capturing it. So we've talked to CDPHE about this quite a bit, about placement of sensors and canisters. Like for Coslet East, we asked them to put a sensor near Coslet East for us. And we had tons of conversations about placement. And they said, well, we want it at a certain distance from the pad so it can get up and over the sound wall. And we want it, but we don't want it too far because then your plume gets diluted and you may not capture it. So if we keep the 2 Boulder Air trailers, I think we have to think about the fact that we're in production now. So thankfully we're in production now. And we see plumes occur less often, much less often. And the winds have to be just right. The plume has to be at such a magnitude that as it disperses over 2,000 feet, it's still at a great enough level that a Boulder Air Station will pick it up. So I get concerned that we're going to miss a lot of possible plumes or maybe upset conditions at the pad if we only had 2 stationary monitors. The Ajax system provides those near pad locations that can be strategically placed and moved easily if we need to move them. Is that helpful?
That is helpful. Thank you for that answer. So I just wanted to ask this question based upon some public comment that we heard. It talked about audited data for both Boulder Air and Ajax. Can you talk about what that means for audited data, and do either of these programs have audited data?
That's a really tough question for me to answer. I don't really know about the nature of auditing. I don't know if any staff here does. I think QA QC data. I know there's processes in place for that for Boulder Air and Ajax. So again, I think that they're both really high quality data that they provide us.
Right, great. And then Councilmember Marsh-Holston asked a little bit about the expense of Boulder Air, but can you talk more about the revenue from the oil and gas operations? Council had seen a little bit of information, and I would love for the public to see more of that, kind of historically what the cost has been, or what the revenue has been and what the costs have shown. And then as well as looking ahead, what that revenue is projected to be and what the costs are projected to be.
Councilmember Schaaf, I would request that you go to your next question or another council member, and we'll see if we can't get that chart up.
Perfect. All right, I'll hold off then.
Thank you.
Mayor, that's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I really just have one question, to be honest, and Councilmember Marsh-Holston, I think alluded to it, but I want to go maybe hopefully a little further than he did. As it relates to the Boulder Air monitoring, I know we've been really active with oil and gas rulemaking. What would the termination of this contract with Boulder Air mean for ozone at large, not just from oil and gas production, but from other VOCs contributed from, like emissions from cars and wildfires, et cetera? How would that impact our ability to do advocacy at the state level when it comes into that policy realm?
That's a great question. So I'll first tackle the wildfire ozone piece of that question. So when we had wildfire smoke in our area, CSU did analyze some of those canisters that went off and they were able to see, you know, there's certain high values of, I think it's acetylene and wildfire smoke and other compounds. Boulder Air was also able to analyze the plumes that were coming in and it was valuable because it was, you know, measurements every hour. So Dr. Helmick provided a lot of really great information about wildfires. He's also able to provide great information about ozone. We're not really involved in talking to the state about wildfires and how that can impact ozone. I don't have the expertise to be involved in rulemakings about that kind of thing. But again, you know, we monitor VOCs and those are really important ozone precursors in the Ajax system and in Boulder Air. So Boulder Air does provide that layer of redundancy in the system. I see a lot of value in both systems for sure. But again, it comes down to, you know, monitoring at, do we need all the different types of monitoring at this point once we're in production? And I think with the rulemaking, I think I've sort of already answered that question. I do believe that we will stay very active and very engaged, especially as the ECMC is now tackling cumulative impacts. They're going to touch on ozone. We just presented to the Ozone Legislative Committee. Like there's just so much rulemaking going on right now. And I just see our data that we've collected being able to support so many different pieces to a lot of different types of rulemaking. As far as wildfires go, I can't speak to that. I hope that answered that. Go ahead.
I would just add what I mentioned before. We do have other communities that are still doing this monitoring. And then as part of our state monitoring, we have a site out at Rocky Flats that's in very close proximity to Broomfield. So when we look at advocacy, again, we will have data to continue to advocate on ozone precursors and the need to come into attainment as a region. The second thing that I would say is when we're looking at alerting the community, you know, one of our best methods right now is the CDPHE alerts that come around high ozone days, because that's for a region. And so we tend to utilize that versus utilizing our own local monitoring systems around ozone, because we don't want to confuse the community. And for the most part, we see they're all pretty much aligned. So when the community, that's one thing we see about the protection for our residents when it comes to ozone is obviously high action alert days. We're getting information out to the public.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we're going back to Councilmember Schaaf's question. I see the chart up on the oil and gas summary revenue and expenses. Does that
Yes.
answer your question, Councilmember Schaaf?
Do you want me to walk through it a little bit, Councilmember Schaaf?
Briefly.
But is there a specific question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I would ask the question. So in 2024 budget, under air quality monitoring, that is more than what staff is proposing. So what is included in that 740 there?
Danae.
Thank you, Councilmember Schaaf, for the question. So maybe let me give a high level of what this chart includes, and then let me dive into a couple of the specifics. So the revenue from oil and gas summaries is combined of the oil and gas assessed property tax values and what we get from those mineral royalties, as well as severance tax.
Ms. Brouillard, I'm gonna play
Sorry.
the mayor here.
Sure. To answer the
What
question.
is that 740,000
So
comprised
we
of?
actually, thank you, Manager Hoffman. For air quality monitoring, we asked for, I believe it was 936,000 for 2024 for contractual services. And what that broke down to was the two networks as is, which is the 740, which is Boulder Air as is for 2023, as well as Ajax as is for 2023. And that was because we did in 5% inflation. So that's what that number is, with the plan to have come back and had this conversation tonight.
Okay, all right, that helps. Thank you, Mayor. That's all.
Thank you, Councilmember Lim.
On the statement by staff that the state is moving towards using PID sensors. Was staff surprised by that movement towards PID sensors? Historically, as we've been through these discussions, it seems to me that industry has discredited in many cases the PID sensors. And Ajax CSU's calculations to try to substantiate that longer intervals would have a certain concentration of exposure, and that therefore, there was an event that occurred that would have violated a health guideline that actually needed a longer exposure than that PID sensor captured. I think.
Thank you, Councilmember Lim, for that question. So to answer the first part, when the state started using PIDs and they told us they have a bunch of them on hand, and yeah, Broomfield let us know, you think where should a sensor be placed? I was pleased to hear that because in the past, it wasn't so easy to convince them that the trigger canister data was what we are seeing happen in a plume. And that's a really good point about industry pushback on those 1 hour extrapolations. And, oh, well, it's an extrapolation that Ajax's CSU is taking a 1 minute canister and they're extrapolating it to 1 hour. So we're not going to do anything because it's a prediction. The state is actually set their PIDs to grab a 45-minute to a 60-minute sample so that they can compare them with a health guideline value. So I think, and I'm hoping that the state now can start to move forward with, if they're capturing a canister and a health guideline value is exceeded, they cannot enforce anything or take any action. But if they're collecting the data themselves, maybe it will get to a place where it will be more actionable.
Okay, that's good movement. Not where we've been in the past fighting industry though. And I guess in that light, we look back at the May 23rd incident at the Livingston pad where extractions failure to maintain the equipment caused a 6-hour VOC and benzene exceedance and exposure to the community. And now there's a notice of violation that the ECMC filed against extraction that's pending. That was, my understanding was there was a failure of the operator sensors overnight to capture that event. It was our sensors that captured that. So I think the question is, yes, that's lovely. The state is pushing PID sensors, but there's different qualities of PID sensors. And we saw in the May 23rd event that the operator sensors, on my understanding is, didn't capture it. So my question was, do we feel confident that the state is putting their trust in the right kind of PID sensors? And are they going, is ECMC going to make the operators use better sensors if there are better PID sensors?
One thing I can say is that because of Reg 7, the operators have to do some type of monitoring. And when I've talked to the APCD and CDPHE, and I say, I don't like the data that operators are collecting. It's just TVOC data, and they're not speciating for anything. And they say, yeah, that's a good point. That's true. And they're not even collecting it in the same format. Ajax could tell you, because they're the contractor working for the state that's actually organizing that mess of Reg 7 data. And the state has always told me, yeah, we told all these oil and gas operators to use PIDs or to, come up with an air monitoring system. And we realized that it needs to be revamped, and they're going to have to go through a whole nother process to strengthen Reg 7 so that operators aren't just throwing PIDs up everywhere and capturing TVOCs over time, because we're way ahead of them. We know that doesn't really mean anything for health because it's reading 900 VOCs and it's not speciating for anything. So I hope that there's movement in the right place, and it seems like there is.
did we do any consideration of renegotiating the Ajax contract? In the respect that we now have, I had the number somewhere. The like in 2022, we had over I think over 100 triggers canisters. And now in 2023, we have, I think, 19 or something, or 11. It was 11 in the first 2 quarters. So that's a lot of the workload. If CSU doesn't have to process, only 1/10 of the trigger canisters that they once had to, if we are having less production issues, then shouldn't we be able to renegotiate the Ajax contract to a lower amount if it's obvious that CSU is not doing as much work? Does that question make sense?
It does, and we're happy to do that. We don't recommend that. We have scrubbed from the program that we have now is the result of a graduated transition over 3 years based on the phases of operation. It goes back to what Dr. Weisner had indicated before, that with those Ajax sensors, we're able to say of the 8 phases of operation, which ones do we need to pay most attention to? Or now that we're in production phase, what are those phases that every other community that's going to be going through this needs to pay attention to? Along with that is also a phased approach on how and where the location of those sensors need to be. So we don't need to have them at the same level of radius that we did before. We had 2 levels of detection, if you will. One hits, and then we had a backup one. So as we move into production phase, strategically, when we look at Dene, Kyle, go back to the recommended that the heat map with where the sensors where we're recommending they be now. And Councilmember Lem, based on we don't recommend reducing any further with regards to Ajax in order to keep the fidelity, the veracity, and the ongoing data that we have right now, so that when we do go to these meetings, we continue to be that voice at the table with the data. Council's direction, if you all would prefer us to roll that back further, we can certainly do that.
Okay, my question was not regarding scaling back the number of sensors. My question was regarding just the recognition that they're not triggering as much. So CSU doesn't have to do probably 1/10 of the canister analysis they once did.
Councilmember Lim, thanks for the question. We did, so I want to back up a little of staff's recommendations. We didn't look at this from a budgetary perspective. We looked at this strictly from data and what we see coming from the air quality monitoring program, as well as what we're seeing from the change in operations. And so when we had the conversation, the fixed amount, those are pretty much fixed amounts in that contract, because the challenge is we may have less triggers, but if we reduce canisters, we lose spatial coverage. We don't know that. So the staff recommendation is to do 1 more year with that coverage so that we know that it is truly trending down and we have enough data to back that up before we make any bigger cuts to that program. So they did not add inflation costs. So there was some negotiations to keep it at the 2023 fixed rate that we have right now.
Okay, thank you. Was there the conversation about moving the Northwest 2 sensor in order to somehow compensate for the lack of the North Pecos trailer, which is there to capture plumes by the residences? Is that maybe a when will that conversation? take
Yeah,
place?
no, we had the discussion with the vendor. So if you, on the Northwest pads right now, the Northwest sensor, Northwest 2 sits in the middle of the two pads, right? And the reason for that was to be able to look at events from the different pads and be able to distinguish from activities happening at the two different pads. Now that they're both in production at the same time, that need is no longer there. And so the thought was to move it to the western side of the Northwest pad so that then you have coverage to the residences going to the west, as well as coming from Livingston from the northeast. So that was the thought, and that would happen when we move into the 2024 if council approves the recommendation tonight.
Okay, thank you. And the fact that Boulder Air has tracked that there are emissions coming from the Northwest pad that cannot be explained. What value does Boulder Air and North Pecos have to that continuing search versus what Ajax points to in that continuing search?
Swim tracker. Swim tracker.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Lim. My name is Ryan Rush, Energy and Environmental Analyst. The value add for the two different programs for the supposed emissions coming from the Northwest pads. I mean, we've spoken tonight a lot about kind of the collaboration, our teams with boots on the ground, our inspectors have with Ajax. We work very closely with Ajax. We also work very closely with Boulder Air currently. And Boulder Air has pointed out continuously over the past several years that they believe there is a minor emission source coming from the Northwest pads. We have been unable to confirm this through inspections. We do things. In addition to daily inspections, we complete inspections when any air quality event happens between the hours of 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. We also, so honestly, the data, so they keep pointing to a minor emission source at the Northwest pads. We are unable to identify a minor emission source. We regularly talk with the operator about pad activities. They keep daily logs. We speak to them every time this comes up. In my opinion, there is, I mean, and we can continue to do that even without Boulder Air. So although their data indicates it may be a minor emission source, we're doing everything we can to identify that emission source. And there is no apparent emission source.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. I wanted to step back just for the big picture here. Because you had outlined at the very beginning the 4 goals when this program started back in 2018, which was entirely different situation. We didn't know what we would find, correct? It seems as though we can check all 4 boxes, that we have achieved all those objectives. So I'm not entirely clear. We've sort of advanced 2 more, but we've sort of already reached that. It seems amorphous what we're trying to accomplish now that as one community. So and I guess that's maybe what you're asking us is what's the goal from here on out? So I'm curious whether in of this 6-year period, I think Director Volling made a mention, other communities have done the same, or are we still lone rangers here?
So other surrounding counties have established air monitoring systems. We've gone above and beyond that with our environmental epidemiologists and that linkage between what we're seeing with air monitoring, oil and gas operations, and then the health concerns.
The Weld County, Boulder,
Yeah,
Adams.
and so primarily our local government coalition is Boulder County. So you have Erie, Longmont, City of Boulder that are involved in air monitoring. And again, they're looking at it more from ozone, not directly related to oil and gas emissions.
So a different data set.
Yeah.
But if I understand correctly, our data has achieved some effects in state policy. It stands alone, it's peer reviewed, but it's not compatible with EPA or state, correct?
Yes, our data has definitely influenced the state policy. And I would say the other thing with that is that I personally think we need to continue the advocacy not only with the pre-data we have, but the data we'll continue to collect going forward. Because I think we're also adding to the body of knowledge of what do you see when you move into production, and emissions still coming from oil and gas sites.
That's influenced by the fact the state won't.
Yes.
Even though, I mean, we had someone talk about, I mean, we're not the EPA and we're not the state, and this is regional. So the data we're collecting is limited just to us.
Yeah.
So I guess it seems like we need a bigger solution.
Yeah.
Rather than continuing to spend millions and millions and millions of just Broomfield money on a regional issue.
Mhm.
So I guess maybe I'm striving for an answer, but I certainly don't think we can continue to do what we've been doing at that scale, and I'm not sure I see the value of more of the same data. But I can see scaling back to what the city has recommended. As this, because I'm not sure where we end, where we stop. And I know there were some emails from folks mentioning, well, the oil gas people will be here for 30 years, but we can't keep doing this for 30 years. At least I don't think that's the intent. So I'm sort of curious, what's the end point do you see for this?
Yeah, I think what the next Director Beauregard mentioned is that we're really now looking at year-to-year data and what we're finding and how that data can advocate for policy change. So the two objectives, and I think actually it was you, Councilmember Cohen, that brought this up last year, is one advantage of keeping the air monitoring and program in place is it keeps the operators accountable because we are able to see what's happening.
Right.
And it informs the public. But the second thing is really looking at the usefulness of that data going forward. So we do feel like scaling back to the recommendation we have now just gives us 1 year. I would say there's two completely different objectives for council when you're having this discussion. One is what we set as this program to do is to monitor oil and gas emissions and the impacts on air quality in our residents. The second conversation is influencing non-attainment and ozone. In my opinion, that's a completely different objective and a different approach we need to take.
Okay, thank you. And I did say that last year, that I did see that potentially had an enforcing, perhaps they were being safer because we were monitoring, though. Again, there's a debate as why we would have to bear the cost of that and not the industry. They're the ones that are here against our will. But thank you. I do have to mention, I apologize. I have to leave in about 2 minutes due to a family matter, but I am at this point supportive of the city recommendation.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. And I did submit, obviously, my thoughts and questions ahead of time. And it's clear I want to see all of the monitoring keep going. And I think there's a place where we can find this happy medium where we can work to keep the Boulder Air, at least the Broomfield Soaring Eagle Station running. And at least until we can find a more appropriate entity to take it over. I don't think I'm hearing anyone say that this isn't important data, that this data shouldn't continue on. We remain in ozone non-attainment. It was clear from, I'm not sure if any of you had the chance to go down today to the health symposium at Anschutz. Heard there too a couple times that we're approaching non-attainment with PM 2.5. We are not moving in the right direction in the state. And we really, this monitoring going on, one of the important things that was pointed out to me about the Boulder Air monitoring over the past few months is we've been having these higher level conversations. And I appreciate very much that our staff has been weighing in and so critically involved as we're making these changes at the state. But one of the pieces that became clear is that we don't have these monitors. Boulder Air has a rare technology where you're combining the precursors, which is the VOCs and the NOx. Every single hour, we have this continuous data. We also have the ozone data. So we have this piece of information that multiple entities are using. The EPA, as I think one of you mentioned, accepts Boulder Air's data. Boulder Air's data has been audited by the EPA and they received that report back saying it is good. So I think the real question here is, if we discontinue this data, we put a gap. So I don't know that we've gone to all the right entities and I actually had some productive conversations. I wish I would have known, I wish I would have known this was taken out of the budget or was going to be taken out of the budget, because when we had the budget conversations in June, it looked like we were keeping the monitoring, and there should have been more of an emphasis then on having these conversations. But there seems like there's a place where the EPA is involved in this because we are moving, and I tried to capture this in that document. I hope most of my colleagues did read it. The EPA, when they come back with the SIP the next time around, they're in a position to disapprove it. And if they disapprove it, we all get reformulated gas. We get impacts to our transportation, no more TIP funding, it halts everything. And we get all of that because we're sitting in a state that's influenced by precursors of oil and gas. So it feels like there's a productive conversation to be had there with the EPA even more than the state. And I'm happy to try to, hopefully offline, we can figure that out and set up those conversations, because there's a couple of key people that we should be talking to, it sounds like. And we can actually add this station into the RACS network potentially, and they just, their stations have longer data. This one's a little bit newer, but this one has critical data that those don't. So there is, I think there's hope there. I just don't want us to run out of time, and at the end of December, this comes down before we find that appropriate entity. So I guess I'm running out of time for my questions, and I don't even have questions, but
No, those were not questions.
I know, I'm just saying
Okay.
that is part of it. This is not questioning anything that staff has done. It's been amazing. And most of my questions were probably answered in there. So I will, I don't know, it's like, it's not even a question. It's a, how do we save ourselves enough time to get to this point where we can continue this program on, or if there's a way to, I guess the one question I do have is regarding like, is there a way that we can shave some money off of the Ajax program? Like Councilmember Lim was suggesting, I think looking at that price again, we no longer have the plume tracker. We have so many fewer sensors. We're not expecting to trigger anything. I'd just be hopeful that we could maybe find a place where we can keep the best of both. And that is my, not even question, that is all I have to say. So thank you.
Okay.
No question.
Did anybody want to address that on staff? That's okay, you don't have to, but I am hearing from our public health director, Jason Balling, and our Broomfield County epidemiologist, Dr. Wisner, that Broomfield would not be harmed by not continuing with the Boulder Air. Is that correct? I'm getting nods. Okay. And the staff is making that recommendation. So I feel pretty safe with that as our top health experts in the city and county. Any other questions? One more? Okay, Councilmember Henkel.
Just to be clear, if we don't continue anymore with Boulder Air, would we know if we're in ozone attainment or not, or what sort of other data do we have? Let's be very clear about that.
So ozone attainment is defined by regions. So it's the Denver Metro Northern region. And that's how they determine with the current air monitoring systems, whether we're in attainment or non-attainment. So the Boulder Air data doesn't contribute to determining our status of attainment or non-attainment. Boulder Air can tell us what we're seeing in Broomfield if we're exceeding those levels, but it's not going to change the attainment designation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there a motion on the first recommendation to direct the city and county manager to renew the air quality monitoring contract with Ajax Analytics? Councilmember Marshall.
So moved.
Is there a second? Councilmember Schaaf.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? No. Okay. Seeing no further discussion, we'll move forward to the vote. All in favor? What? What? It's just, there's two separate motions as outlined in the memo. So, all in favor of continuing with Ajax? Any opposed? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Anderson, no. Cohen,
Yes.
Delgadillo,
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Jaworski,
Yes.
Leslie, Lim,
Yes.
Marshallson,
Yes.
Schaaf,
Yes.
Ward.
Yes.
That passes 8-1. Is there a motion on the second recommendation to move that the city and county manager not renew the air quality monitoring contract with Boulder Air? Councilmember Ward.
So moved.
Is there a second? Councilmember Schaaf.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Anderson.
I would like to propose a motion or an amendment to allow potentially an extension in time to allow a little bit more time to continue negotiate, like to start this discussion with the EPA, the state and others to seriously consider having them take the, like, really take the station over before they take this down. I think there's more emphasis now than there was before that this station might be coming down, and not everyone is aware of that. I think over the last few days, there's been a lot more awareness, and maybe there's an opportunity to have a renewed discussion with the state, with the EPA, and say, before we stop this, you might want to weigh in, and you might want to take this opportunity to save this data, because it is the only station with the ozone, the NOx, and the VOCs, and that is critical information. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilmember Lim, is there any discussion? Councilmember Shav.
Yeah, so I'm unclear on what the amendment is.
It was vague. So how long are you
Thank you.
proposing this extension, Councilmember Anderson?
Like 3 months, potentially, if we haven't figured it out by then.
But I feel like our staff has pretty much exhausted all of those avenues, as they said in their very thorough presentation. So if there's not a compelling reason to believe that there's other sources,
There's compelling reasons, and maybe I can start. Okay, so my question, can I ask a question to our manager? Is there any reason why at this point in time, myself and others can't go out and begin to advocate and try to get the station taken over? It sounds like staff is done. If we find a solution, can we continue this monitoring in Broomfield with funding outside?
It's not up to me, Councilmember Anderson.
Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor. So, so thanks for the clarification on the amendment. So, this would be to, wait to not renew the contract for 3 months. When is the contract with Boulder Air? When does the contract with Boulder Air expire?
Ms. Brouillard?
Expires at the end of this year, which I think is December 31st.
So another question. So in order to let's see, so that would be 1 more month beyond the current expiration of that contract. We haven't approached Boulder Air at that point, but would we, has there been any conversation to extend month by month after the expiration of the contract?
There has not.
Okay, all right, that's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Mayor Pro Tem.
I just question staff, is it even realistic that anything would happen in the next few months? And then my second question is, it sounds like there is 2 months, they're still going to be on site for another 2.5 months roughly. So there is time for someone else to step in, and if something does happen, someone could step in and say, hey, here's $500,000, stay here.
Yeah.
Right?
Till the end of the year.
Yes. So there is time. I guess that's not, I'm seeing heads nodding. Okay. I guess my
Alright.
first question was if it was actually realistic that we would see anything else happen in the next 2.5 months.
As City Manager Hoffman alluded to, we've exhausted all avenues. So if Councilmember Anderson has other avenues where she thinks that's realistic, that's something we're not aware of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councilmember Marsh Holshin.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an extremely tough one for me because health and safety is the #1 thing that we should be prioritizing. That said, I can't, the cost is there, and the fact that staff has indicated that we're not losing any important data in their opinion or advocacy. So I can't support continuing it. So thank you, Mayor.
All right, so we have a motion, an amendment on the table and a second. So the amendment is to extend the Boulder Air contract for 3 more months in case there's other funding. All in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Cohen,
No.
Delgadillo,
No.
Hinkle,
No.
Jazersky, Lim, Marsh Holshin,
No.
Shapp,
No.
Ward,
No.
Anderson.
Yes. Wait, what do we, Yes. What do you-
I'm sorry, that fails 7-2. So back to the motion on the table to not renew. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Any opposed? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Delgadillo,
Yes.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Jazersky,
Yes.
Limb,
Yes.
Marshall,
Yes.
Shapp,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Anderson,
No.
Cohen.
He had to leave, so
Oh.
that does pass 6-1. 8-1, I'm sorry. Thank you, 8-1. I can't wait till we get real software, so I don't have to use tally marks like the 1900s. Thanks, y'all. So we're gonna move on 7-1 for the record. Okay, thanks, y'all. Well, that concludes the items on this evening's meetings agenda. Thank you all so much for being here and for all your work on behalf of health and safety. We'll take a short break for 10 minutes and then we'll reconvene to start this evening's study session. We'll be back at 8 p.m. Thank you. Welcome back. We'll continue tonight with the study session of the City Council. And the study session agenda item is one concept review item. As a reminder, the public may participate in public comment on concept review items either in person or by calling 855-695-3744 and pressing *3 to be placed in the queue for comment. If joining in person, we ask you to come to the podium, state your name and neighborhood for the record. Tonight's concept review is a proposal for a Hyundai auto dealership in the Brainerd V Minor subdivision. We'll follow the city standard procedures for concept plan reviews. First, the staff will present a summary of the application. Following the staff summary, the applicant will make their presentation. We will then take comments from members of the Land Use Review Commission and other interested advisory boards, followed by public comment. Then the applicant will have an opportunity for final comments and finally questions and comments from the City Council. Electronic copies of concept review plans are available at broomfieldvoice.com. Copies of comments provided for each plan at broomfieldvoice.com have been provided to the City Council and can be found in the correspondence folder linked in tonight's agenda. Council members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. And Judy Hammer is going to introduce this item. She was telling me in the back that brevity is the name of the game for this next item. Ms. Hammer, please introduce the item for us.
Well, thank you, City Manager Hoffman. I appreciate it. Judy Hammer representing the Planning Division. And as indicated, this is a concept plan review for a proposed automobile dealership. And next slide, please. This is the, good evening, Mayor, my Mayor Pro Tem. Council members, sorry. I was just going to jump right in. The concept proposal this evening is for a 24,000 square foot automobile dealership to include a showroom and sales area, arena area, and a vehicle service area. The development consists of one building, exterior lighting, parking lot, parking for customers and employees, spaces for automobile storage and display, and landscaping. Next slide, please. The vacant 3.5 acre property is located at 4101 Industrial Lane, immediately to the northeast of the Conscious Alliance, an office and small warehouse and distribution center. The site is visible from US Highway 36. The railroad runs behind the property. Next slide, please. GIS conducted a site visit that included an at-grade video, which we'll review with you right now. If you could bring up the video. The video starts at the north side of the northeast corner of the site along the railroad tracks. It pans out looking southeasterly along the railroad tracks, pans to the south across the site, and continues around to the beginning. So again, the railroad is at the rear of the property line. Probably not. Thank you. Next slide, please. The Broomfield Comprehensive Plan designation for the subject property is industrial. The proposed use is consistent with this designation. The property is also subject to design standards, permitted uses, and other requirements as established in the US West 36 Corridor Urban Renewal Area. It is also located within the interchange influence area as identified in the Broomfield Municipal Code. While the interchange influence area specifically prohibits the proposed use, the urban renewal area permits automobile uses subject to the approval of a use by special review by the Urban Renewal Authority. For this reason, any proposed PUD plan for this use should include a note that states automobile dealerships are subject to approval by the Urban Renewal Authority. Next slide, please. The concept plan depicts one 24,000 square foot building, 54 spaces for customer and employee parking, an area set aside for inventory storage and landscaping. It also includes access from Industrial Lane with secondary shared access proposed from the developed property immediately to the east of the site, which is that Conscious Alliance. So that would be to the right of the slide. A bike and pedestrian sidewalk will be constructed along Industrial Lane, which is shown on this drawing at the bottom of the slide there. This will require the property owner dedicate a minimum of 27 feet of right-of-way to allow for this improvement. Parking requirements are discussed in detail in the staff report. 17 electric vehicle parking spaces are provided per the building requirements that will go into effect on January 1, 2024. Parking will be further evaluated based on specific details provided by the applicant during the formal development review application process. Should this proposal move forward, staff would work with the applicant to ensure that adequate parking is provided in the form of ADA, EV, and employee and customer parking. Landscaping and the exterior lighting will also be evaluated to ensure that code requirements are met. The stormwater detention pond is proposed at the northwest portion of the site. And in this case, it's on the left side over there on the screen. Next slide, please. The architectural illustrations shown here indicate that the building will be oriented towards the street and the service center shown at the rear of the property. Glazing is provided along the forward-facing elevations, and that would be per the design requirements of the urban renewal plan. And the proposed building would be constructed of concrete masonry with a continuous FS system on the exterior. The service center would be located to the rear of the building. Next slide, please. These show the renderings of the proposed, excuse me, signage for the development. This depicts one 33-foot, 11-inch tall monument sign and building mounted service and branding signs. The recently adopted sign code that goes into effect also on January 1, 2024 permits a maximum of 400 square feet of signage based on the building size. Monument signs are limited to 200 square feet per entry with no single face exceeding 100 square feet. The height limit is 20 feet and the setback is limited to 10 feet. The sign package would be subject to further detailed review and it's also subject to a sign permit. Should the signs not meet the code requirements, the applicant would need to either modify the signage or request a variance with the formal development review application as well. And last slide, please. City and County of Broomfield public notice requirements have been met for this meeting. Staff has identified one key issue with the proposed project. As I'd indicated earlier, the property is subject to the Broomfield Municipal Code, Chapter 1729. Automobile sales and service uses are listed as a prohibited use within this interchange influence area. Should the applicant proceed with the development review application for a planned unit development and a site development plan / urban renewal site plan and final plat, the PUD plan should include a request for a variance to allow for the auto dealership. It should also specify that this use is subject to approval of a use by special review per the urban renewal plan. It should also be noted that similar uses or similar variances were granted for, excuse me, car dealerships in the Parkway Circle PUD and other existing dealerships located further east of Industrial Lane are outside of this influence interchange area. Thank you. That concludes staff's presentation. And the applicant is also here to provide a brief summary of the project.
On the applicant's presentation is next. Will the applicant's representative please identify themselves for our listeners before beginning your presentation?
Hi, Mayor and Council. My name is Doug Keith. I'm VP of Construction for Foundation Automotive. Foundation is a relatively new company, about 4 years old. We have about 37 dealerships across North Dakota, Colorado, Texas, Tennessee, and Oklahoma. We have 8 dealerships in Colorado to date, 3 in Castle Rock, 3 in Wheat Ridge, 1 in Westminster, and 1 in Boulder. We've been looking for a new home for both the Westminster and Boulder Hyundai dealerships for a while now. Through our real estate agents, WKRE Real Estate, we have found this 4101 Industrial Lane property that this is the subject of this meeting tonight. We like this location against Highway 36. We like Broomfield, and we really like what Broomfield's vision is for this area. We're excited at the prospect of being part of it. Foundation Automotive has a reputation of being a good corporate citizen in all of the communities that we reside in. To fill you in on where we're at with this land purchase, we've accepted an offer from the owners, and we would like to get a sense tonight of how City Council feels about having a dealership at this location. That's the biggest thing we're trying to get here tonight. And so if there's any feedback, we certainly welcome it, pro or against. That said, we feel confident that our building and our business will be an asset to your community. And we are prepared to tailor our building design, landscape design, and anything else that's desirable to the city of Broomfield. My hope is that this approval process will be more of a conversation as opposed to a hard yes or no. Foundation Automotive is willing to work with you guys to make this happen. Now I'm going to turn it over to my architect, Casey Adronia from Adronia Architecture, and he'll describe this project in a little more detail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, council and mayor. Thank you so much for having us. First off, I just want to say how valuable this process is for developers to get in front of council at such an early phase. I've done developments in a lot of the other jurisdictions on the Front Range, and this is unique to that process. So before spending so much investment just to present what we're looking for and to get feedback early on to help transform the project into something that meets council is extremely valuable. So I'm just very thankful for that setup and how efficient that makes the process. So next slide, please. Doug has given a good explanation of Foundation Automotive. So we can go to the next slide, please. Quick highlights, which Judy just did a great job already, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. You guys have a pretty good understanding, so we can go to next slide, please. It's a little more context. We have Highway 287 to the southeast, and the Interlochen Loop site is directly north of Highway 36. Next slide, please. This one just shows a little bit more of the context of similar uses within the area. We have the Flatiron dealerships to the northwest there off of Interlochen Loop, as well as the Siltahar dealerships to the southeast of this proposed project off of Highway 287. Okay, next slide, please. And then just the immediate context of some of the adjacent uses. We have Conscious Alliance, and then to the southeast, we have Extra Space Storage and Public Storage. Okay, next slide, please. This is just kind of showing some of the context, which again, Judy has already shown. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the site is somewhat L-shaped. So one thing that we kind of liked about the site of how it just naturally laid out is the building in the bigger squared section with minimal parking and drive aisles to the front, which would allow the building to present closer to the street frontage. And then with the vehicle storage and inventory further back set off from the main street and off of 36. So it's not, a big parking lot directly adjacent to 36. Okay, next slide, please. Again, this is the same site, just showing some landscape concept. As you can see, the way the site lays out, again, just breaking up some of the massive kind of parking lot inventory that you can see in a lot of other dealerships. Even the parking storage and inventory that we do have that is set back has a continuous landscape island that would break up down the middle of it. Okay, next slide, please. And again, just some more of the building architecture of a lot of curtain wall, low E glazing at the front with kind of these heavy overhangs, which is an ACM metal panel for the facade. Next slide, please. Just more images here. These are more renderings. Next slide, please. And then these ones are just of very similar projects that have already been built of the Hyundai standards. And just to give you a little bit more of a realistic understanding of what the Hyundai standards and architectural design would look like. Next slide, please. And yeah, that really concludes our presentation. Really just, there are several hurdles to this and approvals as we get through the interchange influence as far as asking for a variance. So just as much feedback that can help us make a decision and perhaps transform or guide where this development moves forward would be great to hear. So thank you.
Thank you both very much. Are there any boards and commissions members who would like to comment on this proposal? Anyone from the Land Use Review Commission? Don't see anybody. You're okay. Oh, well, we'll now proceed with public comments, starting with in person. If there's anyone who'd like to be heard, please come up to the podium. Not seeing any of those either. Moving on. Does any member of council have any questions? Councilmember Delgadillo and then Marsh Holshin.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one question. So I was reading the proposal and it said this had an estimated positive revenue value. I know in the past we've had discussions with dealerships and because of the wear and tear on the road, the impact is a little bit more neutral. Can we clarify what makes this different and kind of how we came to that number?
Appreciate that. And that's an insightful question. And I'm going to have Mr. Romine come down to talk about the finances piece of it. Including the infrastructure and the water.
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, City and County Manager Hoffman. So first off, to answer your specific question, council member, we estimate the financial based upon the tax revenue to be generated, both sales tax and property tax. In this particular case, as a reminder, vehicle sales in Colorado are not attributed to the place of sale, but to the place of garage. So therefore, even though the cars will be sold possibly from this location, or I think not possibly, they want them to be sold from this location. But in reality, that sales tax is collected by those individual jurisdictions. It's collected by the state and then distributed that way. So really what we're talking about is parts and service. And obviously service doesn't necessarily have a sales tax, but parts do. So that'd be the tires, et cetera. So that's really where that fiscal benefit is coming from. And again, it is positive and it could be greater than this, but from the early stages of the conversation, this is what my estimate is about $115,000 annually positive going forward. As far as the infrastructure, autos do have some additional wear and tear, as you heard recently, not to the degree of what trucks might do to some roads. This is an industrial highway or industrial lane, and so it does take a higher degree of traffic and there's a lot more semis. So we wouldn't expect an additional level of wear and tear on our road beyond what we normally have seen in the past. So that's to address your question. Further, those of you who aren't familiar with this area has been prone to some water issues, both from the standpoint of stormwater, but also this property and the property immediately to its south, which is the Conscious Alliance. Neither of them are hooked up to city water at this point. And so actually Conscious Alliance is on cistern water. They have a giant tank if you've ever been in it. It's fascinating to think about that there is a viable nonprofit going there, but they just aren't on the water system. So part of the benefit of all this is Conscious Alliance had to deal with the stormwater issue to the point of they had to rehab the entire building because the stormwater came to about knee height in the entire building and they lost all that. So this development will both further address the stormwater issue, but also bring the water across the property, thereby benefiting that positive impact on that nearby nonprofit. Those, I think most of you know, Conscious Alliance is it's the group, they actually are the people that tend to collect food at concerts and been doing it across the country, and then they distribute that food. And they are a provider of food for like Fish and other nonprofits locally as well as across the country. So I think that covers the full range of that.
Yeah, that covers my question and more. A nice little bonus snippet for me. So that was my only question. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Thank you. Next is Councilmember Marsh Holston.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one question for staff and then two comments for the developer. I'm looking at the memo and I know we'll deal with landscaping in the site development plan, but in the landscaping part, it says, wow, where did I lost it? Mentions bluegrass. So with Kentucky bluegrass limited to more than 30% of the total area. I thought in our landscaping code that we just passed, we prohibited Kentucky bluegrass, strict Kentucky bluegrass in new development, commercial developments.
Ms. Hammer?
We only allow it to, my understanding was that we only allowed it to be 20% seed.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's limited in parking lots. It's prohibited in parking lots.
Ms.
Okay.
Hammer, can you, I didn't get that. Say that one more time, please.
Sorry, it wasn't clear. So Kentucky bluegrass is prohibited in parking lot medians.
But I thought I was just looking at the amendment that we passed and it said that it's prohibited in all commercial developments. The only thing that's allowed is 20% mix.
Right, the mix of the drought tolerant and the Kentucky bluegrass.
So strict Kentucky bluegrass is prohibited.
Right.
Okay.
So we'll work with the applicant on
Gotcha.
the appropriate landscaping.
That was my only question on that. And then
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks.
two questions or two comments for the developer. One, I think this is a great use of this space, so I appreciate you guys bringing this to Broomfield. One comment that maybe consider for given that this property borders 36, have you considered public art on the building as far as
We're definitely open to adding some art in whatever form that might be, and we can have a conversation with you guys and or your city staff to come up with something that is appropriate and enhances both the city and our project.
Great. And then the only comment I had is I see that your parking that you're proposing is less than our current code and less than our updated proposed code. And I just want to say that if you ask for a variance for that, I fully support that. So I appreciate that. So that's all I had, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Councilmember Shah.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one question and then a couple of comments to keep it concise. So there was mention in the staff memo concerning the setback off of Industrial Lane. Can you talk more about what that setback looks like and what the impact of that would be, as well as the relation of that setback along Industrial Lane as well?
Or I might ask if we could have the slide up showing one of the site plans. I think might be slide 1 or 2 or 3 in the staff presentation. But yes, there is additional right-of-way improvement. I'm sorry, Anna Burtonzetti, Planning Director and Community Development Co-Director. Good evening. So thank you for bringing that up. It really helps. So along Industrial Lane, there is additional right-of-way that is needed to be dedicated. I believe, I'm going to get it wrong, but it was around 27 feet, I believe, of additional right-of-way dedication. So what you're seeing here on the screen is the existing industrial lane, and then there would be kind of the landscape strip, and then a larger multimodal path, and then another landscaped area, and then the parking lot. The 27 feet really goes very close up to the parking lot, but it is a very wide dedication that we're asking of the property owner. So what is being presented as part of the concept review is a request that if this were to be brought forward, they would be dedicating that 27 feet, but requesting then a reduction in their required setback from the edge of the right of way. But it would be, as shown here, there would be an area between the street and the multimodal path, and then again between the edge of the path and the property. But the property line itself would only be a matter of feet from the edge of the actual right of way. Does that help to illustrate? I'm happy to.
Yeah, let me ask a follow-up. So is this in line with other projects that are there along Industrial Lane?
Trying to walk through in my brain kind of along Industrial Lane. Yes, a lot of these properties were already in existence prior to having to acquire additional right of way for these multimodal improvements. So I don't think this is out of character for the area.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So a couple comments just really quickly. Thank you to the I guess not applicant yet, hopefully applicant in the future. Thank you for bringing this project to Broomfield. You know, I'm fine with the car dealership located in the interchange influence area. In fact, I'm looking forward to kind of having this car dealership be a bookend, an active, you know, business along industrial lane that, you know, could bring about more visibility to the nonprofits, other businesses, services in that area. So that is exciting for me. You know, just as staff kind of talked about the setback, I would think that, you know, I would be fine with it, the setback, as long as it's in line with the other projects that are along there, along industrial lane, just so that it doesn't fall out of character, right? You know, I would say that one concern I have, and I think that this just needs to be carefully planned, is about the lack of parking and kind of the drop-off zone for cars. We saw a similar experience with the car dealerships up in Via Vara, where you would have car drop-offs right in the middle of the road. It would block traffic, create unsafe situations for bicycles and pedestrians. So I'd want to ensure that there was careful planning for where those car drop-off locations were to ensure that we weren't taking up bike lanes or crossing sidewalks, things like that, creating unsafe situations. So I think that's more of a planning thing and just ensuring that that's built into the project. The monument sign, I think, you know, as long as it's in line with the other industrial lane projects that are along there, I'm fine with that for what comes forward. So thank you again for bringing this project to Broomfield. I would love to see it in the future.
Councillor, I guess I just wanted to say that, you know, that is something that we run across and we do need to plan it into our dealerships is where do we unload? And this will be no different than, it won't be on industrial lane, just FYI.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for this. I am actually very excited about it coming to Broomfield. Looks very classy. I have some other comments as well, but I just wanted to ask staff. Sometimes in our municipal code, I often wonder why we have these prohibited uses. And it seems like we've already granted variances for car dealerships in the area. Is there a historical context as to why we have that in our municipal code, as to why automobile sales and service uses are listed as a prohibited use within the interchange influence area?
For me to go back and really understand exactly what went into the crafting of it. But generally speaking, the interchange influence area covers almost all of Interlochen and the mid-cities area, where we also see limitations on car washes and other drive-through facilities. They were really trying to create an area along the US 36 corridor and at these major intersection areas with the US 36 that was not as car centric, had higher levels of design requirement, really creating something special in the mid cities and in Interlochen area. So I think that's where it was coming from. It is not consistently applied, like Ms. Hammer was mentioning in the urban renewal area. It is a permitted use as long as it is subject to a use by special review. So just more careful consideration of where it would be located within the area. And obviously the variances have been granted previously up in the Parkway Circle area for some of the newer dealerships as well.
Okay, so it sounds like it's more of an aesthetic thing. It's not a safety issue. That's the one thing I was just concerned about, making sure it's not a safety issue with a dealership, but it's more cosmetic.
Probably more cosmetic, and then how it relates to other surrounding uses. It's not usually something that we would see in, for example, a mixed use area.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, yeah, and I would like to second what Councilmember Marsh-Holshan said too, and you know, incorporating some sort of art. I would love to see it sort of match the Interlochen area. You know, you see a lot of great signage in the Interlochen area. I also would love to see maybe even the word Broomfield on there. So many times people don't know if they're in Broomfield or Westminster or Boulder or whatnot. And if they're along Highway, you know, 36, it'd be great to have saying Hyundai Broomfield. I think it would be a proud thing for us to have on there. That'll be, up to the council, I would imagine, and you guys as well, if you'd be amenable to that. But I think it would be a really good look for Broomfield. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. One question for staff, and Councilmember Schaaf kind of alluded to this. But I just really want to clarify the industrial lane trail that's supposed to connect Flatiron Station with Nickel Street. We know we've completed up to where Sheps Crossing is. If this project were to come forward and approved, the sidewalk and the multimodal path that was referenced would be part of that link, would it not?
Thank you for the question. Yes, this path connects into the larger network, if that was the question, Councilmember Ward.
Yes, thank you. And then I guess the rest of my comments are reserved for the potential applicant. You will find that I detest car-centric designs in almost every capacity. However, given the location of this project, I will not detest it. At least not too much.
Thank you from the old people who can't ride bikes everywhere.
Don't worry, I'll get you riding a bus someday. As it relates to the parking lots, have you guys thought about using solar panels to cover the open parking lots instead of just leaving them as open impervious spaces that
I don't know if it's actually something we could do. Is that correct? Casey? Cover the grass, like in between the park. You're talking about the grassy areas in between the.
No, I'm talking about covering the actual parking stalls.
Oh, like cover the whole parking lot
Yes.
with,
Yes.
with a canopy and covering that, that isn't something that we have considered.
I would recommend it just because you already are creating an impervious surface that does nothing for the environment but create a heat island, and
Right.
might as well just make it useful in some capacity other than storing cars. And then other than that, I think that was really my only concern as of right now. I might have other questions or comments if this does come forward, but
Okay.
I think overall for the area, it's a suitable use for the location.
Thank you for your comments. And we'll
Thank
certainly
you,
give that some
Councilmember.
consideration when we get further.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Lim.
Yes, in general, I'm in favor of this project. With regard to the number of parking spaces, that seems still to be determined. We have a new parking, if this does not even fit our new parking code that, passed first reading, then if that's the parking code that goes forward after second reading, then I would think this development should fit our revised parking requirements. And in conjunction with that, then there was a note that there had to be a further discussion of installing the correct number of EV parking stalls that has to still be discussed. So I was hopeful that that conversation would go forward in a positive direction. I guess I was curious, I don't know if this is a staff question. And September 22, we reviewed an online concept plan for 3 flex buildings in this location. Was it due to the infrastructure problems that you alluded to that project did not go forward?
Councilmember Lim, that project is still under review. It's in formal development review. So unusual, but there. This is actually the first time in my planning career that I've had 2 applications on one piece of property. So there's nothing against, that's in the code that says that you can't have 2 applications on one property to be considered for development. The flex buildings are under the formal development review and they have undergone 2 referral reviews. This is still under concept. So I guess it'll depend on, the property owners and how they choose to move forward. But they can't have both, obviously. When it comes down to it, they can't have the industrial flex buildings and the dealership.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's still active.
Mr. Romain, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah.
And may I add, what a great problem to have.
Yeah.
So to Judy's point, yes, that is still alive. The seller of the property is actually the developer who proposed 3 industrial buildings. And clearly the seller that has negotiated and worked with with this firm. So he is holding that in kind of in his pocket, we'll say, as this project continues to move forward. So both of them are very viable. Both of them are interesting. And he, as the seller, is trying to determine which he wants to go forward. And clearly, since it's moved to this level, he's to some degree indicated, as long as this is going forward through the council review and the concepts, that's likely going to help him inform his decision. So he is the seller, one and the same.
Okay. Do I get to ask the staff which project would have the greater financial impact to Broomfield?
And in this, so I will start, and perhaps Jennifer may want to add. This is as she pointed out already, the city and county managers already pointed out, this is a good problem to have. The 2 things that we have really been trying to evaluate is they have slightly different fiscal benefits. Obviously, this is a sales tax benefit beyond just the property tax benefit that we would likely see from a light industrial development. The second, and the other part that as I've both been talking with the property owner as well as with the applicants as they've been moving forward, is the activation of industrial lane. As pointed out, it's not just Conscious Alliance. There are a number of sports, musical, other nonprofits that are operating in industrial lane that are kind of hidden in the background. And so part of what we as a staff have been thinking about is that activation of industrial lane and how does that occur? And how do we bring more eyes, more attention to it? And so that's been one of the key characteristic differences. This would bring more of that consumer attention and bring more of that community awareness to industrial lane. I would say, and this is a bit of perhaps a personal level, or not a personal, but a professional level. From the day I've walked in here, one of the things that several council members have repeatedly said to me is, please, no more storage facilities. And so I have, at least in some of the work that I've been doing, and Jennifer echoes it every time we have some of these conversations, is how do we change that characteristic of those 2 storage facilities, which have been approved, which have been built, but how do we change that front door image of Broomfield away from storage and light industrial? So that's how we've looked at it. And I've had these conversations over the last couple of years. Jennifer and I have had these conversations. Jennifer, if you want to add anything here, please bail me out.
I think it's all about the activation. We've been talking about that corridor for the last 4.5 years. And that's a tough spot to develop anything. So what these developers are bringing forward step in the right direction to really be good partners with Broomfield as we move forward. They're very amenable, they're open, they're responsive. And I see sponsorship for, I don't know, softball.
Thank you. As someone who has questioned Mr. Romain a few times about, really, are all of these industrial flex buildings going to end up getting used? I echo, yes, it is nice to have something different in there than industrial flex. But I did have questions about how they were going forward at the same time. So thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Jaworski.
Thank you. Well, I have so many questions.
Really?
No. But I'm gonna keep some of my questions to myself. But so I was thinking, why can't we do, but why can't you do both? You know, Carvana has their vending machine towers, so we could have some light industrial on the bottom and bunch of, you don't have to answer that today. So yeah, I'm overall happy to have you guys, trying to come into Broomfield. A bit familiar with this property. I was kind of surprised that it's actually big enough for a car dealership. So I guess I haven't actually been on it, but just driving by there a lot. The only concern that I have being familiar with that area is the traffic, and I know going west from your property, the road goes, I think, down, turns and goes down significantly, and traffic through there, including myself, travels at a high rate of speed. So I am, I guess that's the one concern when I was thinking about this, is that if you're having people going in and out of the parking lot there's kind of a blind curve coming up. So I just you're gonna have to address that somehow, because I think that's kind of could become an accident prone area, because right now there's not a whole lot of in and out of traffic in that area, on the western end of industrial, as you've heard. And I think just the layout of that, where you're going to be, I'm not sure what the answer is, but that was my one concern. Beyond that, I was just trying to figure out how you do a car dealership in a non-car centric manner, but you can think about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council member feedback? Councilmember Anderson?
Sure. Have you put any thought into EV charging stations at the site and the growth and the EV sales? Just out of curiosity. And I also want to second Councilmember Ward's solar powered covers, and they also reduce damage to vehicles in hailstorms. So they're very, very useful. But yeah, any thoughts you put it? I know a lot of dealerships have like 1 or 2 EV charging stations, but it feels like there should be increasing thought there as we're transitioning. Thank you.
Would the applicant like to respond?
Yes, great question. And as Doug knows, with the dealerships, sales of electric vehicles just going up more and more all the time. That's something that we're adding to a lot of the dealerships around town. But I would say in respect to Broomfield's new parking code, the amount of EV that we are required to come in with is I would say putting us way above the curve as far as demand goes. So I think that this site will be very well equipped with EV charging stations.
Wonderful. Anyone else? Well, I concur with my colleagues. I think it would be a welcome addition to this little strip of a couple of storage places and a nonprofit using a rain barrel. They really need the water infrastructure clearly, and the fact that you're going to be able to help with that is really appreciated. And it just makes sense. It's a good fit for the location. So we appreciate you bringing the project forward for consideration. I look forward to seeing you come back. Thank you. Do you know Westminster just started doing concept reviews? Mayor McNally loved the idea that we had them and just started implementing them a couple of months ago because she thought it was a really good idea. So Westminster's getting with the program too. I know, we like it too. Thank you for that. All right, well, that concludes, and thank you staff for your work on this as well. My apologies. That concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Ms. Hoffman, did you have something you wanted to say about your little packets?
So
Because
those
there was no
are,
manager's report technically.
those are from the PD.
Uh-huh.
You each have 2 catalytic converter fingerprints. We're having PD that you can come by and they will help you register. It actually affixes to your catalytic converter, so it's not magic. It doesn't preclude your catalytic converter from being taken, but they are able to track it. And so it's easy to put on yourself. You can register it with that QR code. We don't have the data or any key performance indicators for the preventative measures of continually marketing that, but we've distributed over 500. And PD continues again to continue to have the I'm trying to find a word.
kits.
The
The engraving kits.
Thank you, Keza.
Something?
Okay, whoever gets it gets 20 bonus points.
Anybody? Any hints? Locks.
Events.
Oh.
They're having the actual events. Okay,
So
so
folks
Mayor.
can get these at the PD event.
Yes, they
Okay.
can, yes, so just go to the broomfieldpd.org. And that's also contributing to the increasing decrease of the auto thefts. So Chief Hempelman will be back for her updates, not the next meeting, but the following meeting. And I think we'll all be eager to hear what those results are. We continue to go in the right direction.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Manager Hoffman, and thank you all, council.